Three of the committee rules, the vote on this question is postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 5403, the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act. The clerk will report the bill, which is distributed in advance.
H.R. 5403, a bill to amend the Federal Reserve Act to prohibit the Federal Reserve banks from offering certain products or services directly to an individual, to prohibit the use of central bank digital currency for monetary policy and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open to amendment at any point. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer, has an amendment in the nature of a substitute, copies of which have been distributed in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5403.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read and will serve as base text for purposes of amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Ranking member?
I object to treating the ANS as a base.
The amendment in the nature of a substitute, there is an objection to the amendment, the ANS being considered as base text. The amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as a first-degree amendment for purposes of amendment. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes. The whip is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry. I'm extremely proud to have this legislation that, frankly, I've been working on for 3 years at least. The CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act included in your markup today. It's the first anti-central bank digital currency legislative effort introduced in the United States and for the past 2 Congresses. And we've worked with my colleagues and with stakeholder groups to update, improve, and grow support for this bill. Today, this bill has the support of 60 members of Congress and groups ranging from the Independent Community Bankers Association and American Bankers Association to Club for Growth, Heritage Action, and the Blockchain Association. We've come a long way. This bill is simple. It halts the efforts of this administrative state under President Biden from issuing a financial surveillance tool that will undermine the American way of life. Unlike decentralized cryptocurrencies, a central bank digital currency is a digital form of sovereign currency that is designed and issued by a government and transacts on a digital ledger that is controlled by that government. In short, a central bank digital currency is a government-controlled, programmable money that, if not designed to emulate cash, could give the federal government the ability to surveil and restrict Americans' transactions. This is not just alarming, it's downright un-American. We've already seen examples of governments weaponizing their financial system against their citizens. In China, the Communist Party is using a central bank digital currency to track the spending habits of its citizens. The data is being used to create a social credit system that rewards or punishes people based on their behavior. Closer to home, in the Western Hemisphere in Canada, the Trudeau administration froze the bank accounts of individuals involved in the 2022 trucker protests. That might work in Canada, that doesn't work here. This appetite for financial surveillance may be gaining a stronghold, unfortunately, right here at home. The White House issued an executive order placing urgency on central bank digital currency research and development, and the agency reports to that executive order have made it clear that the Biden administration is not only itching to create a CBDC, but they are willing to trade Americans' right to financial privacy for a surveillance-style central bank digital currency. We're not going to let this happen. My bill ensures the United States digital currency policy is in the hands of the American people, not the administrative state, so that it reflects our American values of privacy, individual sovereignty, and free market competitiveness. American values. This is what the future global digital economy needs. If not open, permissionless, and private like cash, just like cash, a central bank digital currency is nothing more than a CCP-style surveillance tool that can be weaponized to oppress the American way of life. If China embraces it, you know it's something worth standing against in this country. I'd like to welcome all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this bill, which protects innovation and defends against an ever-expanding government surveillance state. Thank you again, Chairman McHenry and Congressman Hill, for working with me on this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman, the author of the bill, yields back. Mrs. Waters of California is recognized to strike the last word. Gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. In the previous two Congresses, I and Democrats on this committee led the effort to explore central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, and the role they could play in the U.S. and the global financial system. Through the important research of the Fed, and its reserve banks on this issue, as well as Treasury, the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy, and others, we have learned that a CBDC has the potential to improve our payment system, including the ability to make quicker and safer cross-border payments between institutions. However, I recognize that there are still several challenges that we must continue to explore, including with regard to consumer protection, national security, and financial inclusion. Unfortunately, this bill, which I will call the CBDC Anti-Innovation Act, introduced by Representative Emmer, would permanently shut down the important work the Fed is doing to research a potential U.S. CBDC and the benefits different types of CBDCs could bring to our payment system. Specifically, it would prevent the Fed from issuing a CBDC directly to an individual, as well as on a wholesale level between banks. Our continued research on CBDCs could be critical to maintaining our position as the principal global reserve currency. We don't know at this point how CBDCs could shape the global financial landscape. We do know that 130 countries around the world are racing to develop and implement a CBDC. What will happen if CBDCs issued by other central banks gain traction as a preferred method of payment in international trade transactions? Are we comfortable allowing the Chinese yuan or currencies from other countries to overtake the U.S. dollar as the principal global reserve currency? I, for one, am not. Nevertheless, instead of taking steps to ensuring the United States wins the digital currency space race against emerging powers like China, Republicans are making baseless attacks against a CBDC that does not even exist. This bill is not only an unnecessary diversion, it may ultimately restrict the Fed and Treasury from continuing their important research and testing. This bill would unnecessarily hinder innovation before we've had a chance to fully explore CBDC's potential benefits and challenges. For these reasons, I would urge my colleagues to oppose this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Would the gentlelady yield?
Would you yield to Mr. Lynch?
Yes, I will yield to Mr. Lynch.
Thank you. I just have some, obviously I'm opposed to this bill, but I do have some questions about the way this is drafted. Mr. Chairman, I see the member has left, but from my reading, just reading the text of this, and I'm not, this is not a substantive, this is a procedural question. It appears that the addition of Section 5 on the bill would negate Sections 2 and all of Sections 3 and 4 in the bill. It speaks against itself. So I'm just looking for some guidance from the drafter. He said he spent several years on this. And so specifically Section 5, right, if you read Section 5, it would prohibit the issuance of a CBDC altogether absent congressional authorization, whereas Section 2, 3, and 4 would only prohibit the issuance of a CBDC subject to certain terms. So there's two definitions in there of the gentleman's prohibition, and I'm just curious as to which one he wants, because under this, as I said before, Section 5 effectively negates, internally in this bill, it negates Sections 2 and parts of Section 2 and all of Sections 3 and 4 in the bill. And so it attacks itself. So I'm just looking to get an answer on that, Mr. Chairman. Maybe we could refer it to counsel, committee counsel, that would be great. I just want to know what I'm arguing against, and there's a difference here. There's two different descriptions that he's laid out.
You yield back to the ranking member.
I do, yes.
The gentlelady's time has expired. I recognize the gentleman from Ohio for 5 minutes to strike the last word.
I thank the chairman, and I thank the author of the bill, and frankly, the bipartisan coalition that has worked to be clear that there is no authorization for anyone in the United States of America to establish a central bank digital currency. And I think the language of this bill is important because we should be clear that it should halt any effort by the central bank, the Federal Reserve, to develop a central bank digital currency. By all means, research them, study them, understand how they work, because they're antithetical to Western civilization. Frankly, they're antithetical to our way of life in the United States of America, and allowing the Federal Reserve to continue doing what they're doing, literally recruiting and hiring people in the San Francisco Fed office to build a central bank digital currency, is the financial equivalent of allowing the Empire from Star Wars to build the Death Star, so long as they promise not to turn it on. It's incredibly foolish for the United States to build a currency system that is copying the Chinese Communist Party's system of coercion and control. There are countries around the world developing central bank digital currencies, and they're all doing it the same way as China. A centrally managed, centrally controlled, i.e. intermediated by the central government, database that disrupts money's proper function, which is a stable store of value and efficient means of exchange, and corrupts it into something that is universally depicted as evil. Whether you're talking about Scripture in the book of Revelation or dystopian fictions like 1984 or Brave New World, the money is always corrupted in this way, and it's always evil. Why would the United States need to work on an evil system of money? We need to preserve what this bill says is still preserved, a permissionless, peer-to-peer payment system like cash, something that does not have an intermediary between the owner of private property and the government. The person that you want to trade with, you ought to be able to trade with. The reality is central bank digital currency effectively eliminates private property. All of your money is on deposit with the central bank, and you only have a claim to it. And the claim then is conditioned upon whatever the central government ultimately establishes. You can't transact, you can't trade, you can't move that store of value. And the idea that this is somehow going to help the unbanked is insane. Because when you ask the unbanked, why are you unbanked? A lot of it is because of surveillance capitalism. Our current banking system already has too much of a police state on it. The government is already an intermediary between people and their capital. Frankly, the way that you prevent that is by carrying cash. And I'm really encouraged by the bipartisan nature of bills that protect the ability for our cash, which says legal tender for all debts public and private, to continue to be the payment system where people can transact in retail business. If you're open to the public, you ought to be accepting cash. And we moved a bill in a bipartisan way last Congress to do just that. Once you digitize the money, it should have the same characteristics. And a central bank digital currency inherently is the opposite of that. It is a permissioned, intermediated system for coercion and control. A permissionless system would be something more similar to Bitcoin. You could digitize it. And frankly, that's why a lot of people have been drawn in the unbanked and underbanked community to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, because there is no third party between you and the value that you own and have created. You can move that value very efficiently across space because it's digitized. That's a feature that people could say, well, central bank digital currencies could do that, but not in the same way. They want an intermediary to be between you and your money. And frankly, the core of that is the essence of our Keep Your Coins Act that I wish would be more bipartisan because it is the same characteristics of cash in a digital form. And that is the way you help the unbanked and the underbanked. I support Mr. Emmer's bill, and I urge all of our colleagues to do the same. I yield back.